Sarah Mitchell was folding laundry in the kitchen when she heard the heavy footsteps on the front porch. Through the window, she could see the silhouette of a man in military dress uniform, his posture rigid and commanding. What happened next would change everything she thought she knew about courage, sacrifice, and the true meaning of service. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The evening had started like any other Tuesday in the quiet suburb of Oakwood Heights, just outside Fort Braxton. Sarah Mitchell, 19 years old and saving money for college, had been babysitting the Hendricks children for almost 8 months. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid well, and the kids, 7-year-old Emma and 5-year-old Jake, had become like family to her. Colonel Rebecca Hendricks and her husband Michael had left for their monthly dinner date around 6:30, leaving Sarah with her usual instructions: bedtime by 8:30, no more than 1 hour of television, and Jake's inhaler was on the kitchen counter if he needed it. Simple enough. Sarah had done this routine dozens of times before. Emma was sprawled on the living room carpet, colored pencils scattered around her as she worked on a drawing of what appeared to be a rainbow-colored horse. Jake was building an elaborate fortress, out of couch cushions, complete with sound effects for every imaginary battle. The house felt warm and lived in, filled with the comfortable chaos that comes with young children. Around 7:15, Sarah noticed Jake had gone unusually quiet. She looked up from helping Emma with her artwork to find him sitting on the floor, breathing in short, rapid bursts. His face was flushed, and there was a slight wheeze with each exhale. "Jake, honey, are you okay?" Sarah asked, already moving. Toward him, the little boy shook his head, pressing his small hand against his chest. Sarah had seen this before. Jake's asthma could flare up without warning, especially when he got excited during play. She quickly retrieved his inhaler from the kitchen, helping him use it properly while speaking in calm, reassuring tones. But this time was different. Instead of the usual quick recovery, Jake's breathing became more labored. His lips were taking on a bluish tint that made Sarah's heart race. She tried the inhaler again, but Jake was struggling to coordinate his breathing enough to use it effectively. "Emma, I need you to go upstairs to your room and stay there, okay?" Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Is Jake sick?" Emma asked, her colored pencils forgotten. "He's having trouble breathing, but I'm going to help him. Just go upstairs." "For me, sweetheart." Emma, sensing the seriousness in Sarah's tone, gathered her crayons and headed upstairs without argument. Sarah turned her full attention to Jake, who was now sitting with his shoulders hunched, working hard for each breath. Sarah's first instinct was to call Hendricks, but she knew they were at least 20 minutes away, even if they left immediately. Jake needed help now. She dialed 911, her hand steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. 911, what's your emergency?" "I have a 5-year-old boy having a severe asthma attack. His inhaler isn't working and his lips are turning blue." The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional. "What's your location?" Sarah rattled off the address on Maple Street, then followed the dispatcher's instructions. She helped Jake into a position that would make breathing easier, spoke to him in soothing tones, and monitored his condition while waiting for the paramedics. The ambulance arrived within 7 minutes, but to Sarah, it felt like an eternity. The paramedics, an experienced team she would later learn, were named. Rodriguez and Chun quickly assessed Jake's condition and began treatment. They administered a nebulizer treatment and prepared him for transport to the hospital. "You did everything right," Rodriguez told Sarah as they loaded Jake into the ambulance. "Your quick thinking probably saved his life." Sarah rode with Jake to Regional Medical Center, holding his small hand as the nebulizer treatment began to work its magic. She had called Hendricks from the ambulance, and they were already en route to the hospital. She also called her own parents, knowing they would want to know where she was at the hospital. Jake was admitted to the pediatric unit for observation. His breathing had stabilized, but the doctors wanted to monitor him overnight to ensure there were no complications. Sarah stayed until Hendricks arrived, her heart finally beginning to slow to its normal rhythm as she saw Jake's color return to normal. "Colonel." Hendricks embraced Sarah with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for being there for him." What Sarah didn't know was that word of the incident had already begun to spread through the tight-knit military community at Fort Braxton. Colonel Hendricks, respected throughout the base for her leadership and tactical expertise, had shared the story of how a teenage babysitter had potentially saved her son's life through quick thinking and calm action under pressure. The story reached the ears of Colonel David Morrison, the base's executive officer, who mentioned it during a briefing with the commanding officers. It was the kind of story that resonated in a community where split-second decisions and grace under pressure were valued above almost everything else. But it was General Patricia Walsh, a 3-star general visiting from the Pentagon, who heard the story and requested more details. General Walsh had spent 30 years in the Army, rising through the ranks in an era when female officers faced significant challenges. She had a particular appreciation for individuals who demonstrated courage and competence when it mattered most, regardless of their age or civilian status. 3 days after the incident, Sarah was back at the Hendricks house for her regular babysitting shift. Jake was fully recovered and back to his energetic self, though Sarah found herself checking on him more frequently than usual. She had also researched pediatric first aid and CPR courses, determined to be even better prepared if something like this ever happened again. Emma had made Sarah a thank you card with a drawing of a superhero cape, and Jake had insisted on showing her his Brave Boy sticker from the hospital. The evening felt normal again, with homework, dinner prep, and the usual bedtime routine. Around 8 o'clock, just as Sarah was helping Jake brush his teeth, there was a firm knock at the front door. Sarah looked out the window and saw a military vehicle parked in the driveway. Her first thought was that Colonel Hendricks had forgotten something and sent someone to retrieve it, but when she opened the door, she found herself face to face with a man whose presence immediately commanded attention. He was tall, with silver hair and a bearing that spoke of decades of military service. His dress uniform was immaculate, and the insignia on his shoulders indicated a rank Sarah didn't immediately recognize, though she could tell it was high. "Miss Mitchell?" His voice was deep and measured. "Yes, sir. I'm General Marcus Patterson. I was wondering if I could have a word with you." Sarah's mind raced as she looked up at General Patterson. His uniform was adorned with ribbons and medals she didn't recognize, but his weathered face and steady gaze suggested someone who had seen more than his share of difficult situations. "Of course, General. Please come in." Sarah stepped aside, acutely aware of Jake's toothbrush still in her hand and Emma's art supplies scattered across the coffee table. General Patterson entered the living room, his eyes quickly taking in the domestic scene. Emma peeked around the corner from the staircase, curious about the visitor in the impressive uniform. "Emma, time for bed, sweetheart," Sarah said gently. "But I want to see the soldier," Emma protested. General Patterson smiled, the stern expression softening considerably. "Good evening, young lady. I'm General Patterson. I hear you've been taking good care of your brother." Emma beamed at the attention. "Sarah saved Jake when he couldn't breathe. She's really brave." "Yes, I've heard about that. Now you'd better listen to Miss Sarah and get ready for bed." Emma nodded seriously and headed upstairs. Sarah could hear Jake calling for help with his pajamas, and she excused herself briefly to get both children settled. When she returned, General Patterson was standing by the window, hands clasped behind his back. "General, can I get you some coffee or water?" "That's very kind, but I won't be staying long." He turned to face her. "Miss Mitchell, I understand you handled a medical emergency here 3 days ago." Sarah nodded, suddenly feeling very young. Jake had an asthma attack. It was more severe than usual, so I called 911. Colonel Hendricks tells me you likely saved her son's life. I just did what anyone would do. The paramedics are the ones who really helped him. General Patterson studied her for a moment. Anyone would call 911 certainly, but not everyone would remain calm enough to follow dispatcher instructions while caring for a frightened child. Not everyone would make the decision to send the sister upstairs to protect her from seeing something traumatic. Not everyone would ride in the ambulance and stay at the hospital until the parents arrived. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. Jake was scared. I couldn't leave him alone. No, you couldn't. General Patterson moved to the couch and gestured for Sarah to sit across from him. Miss Mitchell, may I ask what your plans are after high school? I graduated last spring. I'm taking a gap year to save money for college. I want to study nursing. Nursing. He nodded approvingly. What drew you to that field? Sarah considered. The question. I guess I've always been good in crisis situations. When I was younger, I was the one who stayed calm when my little cousin fell and broke his arm at a family picnic. My mom always said I had steady hands and a level head. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Those are valuable qualities. General Patterson leaned forward slightly. Miss Mitchell, I'm here because word of your actions reached some people at Fort Braxton. People who recognize the kind of character you demonstrated. I'm not sure I understand, sir. What you did required more than just quick thinking. It required what we call grace under pressure, the ability to assess a situation, make sound decisions, and execute those decisions while managing your emotions and taking care of others. These are leadership qualities that can't be taught. In a classroom, Sarah shifted uncomfortably. I was just babysitting. You were responsible for the safety and well-being of 2 children. When one of them faced a life-threatening emergency, you prioritized his needs, protected his sister from trauma, communicated effectively with emergency services, and provided continuity of care until his parents could take over. That's not just anything. The weight of his words settled over Sarah. She had replayed the events of that evening many times, mostly focusing on what she could have done differently or better. She hadn't thought of her actions as anything particularly noteworthy. General, why are you telling me this? Because I believe you should know that your actions have been noticed and appreciated by people who understand their significance. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. The officers at Fort Braxton wanted to present you with something. Sarah's eyes widened as he opened the box to reveal a medal she didn't recognize. It was gold and blue, suspended from a ribbon with red and blue stripes. This is the Civilian Life Saving Medal. It's awarded to civilians who risk their own safety or demonstrate exceptional courage in saving or attempting to save a life. But I didn't risk my safety, Sarah protested. I made a phone call. You took responsibility for a medical emergency involving a child who wasn't your own. You made critical decisions without knowing if they were correct. You placed his welfare above your own comfort and convenience. In my book, that qualifies. Sarah stared at the medal, overwhelmed. I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything. But I hope you'll accept this as a token of appreciation from the men and women at Fort Braxton who understand the value of what you did. As Sarah reached for the box, General Patterson stood and moved to attention. To her complete shock, he raised his hand in a crisp military salute. General, you don't need to. Yes, I do. His voice was firm but warm. Courage deserves recognition, regardless of uniform or age. You've earned this respect. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she accepted the medal. The weight of it in her hands felt significant, not because of the gold and ribbon, but because of what it represented. There's something else, General Patterson said, relaxing his posture. I've spoken with the nursing program director at State University. They have a scholarship program for students who demonstrate exceptional character and community service. If you're interested, I'd be happy to provide a recommendation letter. Sarah's breath caught. State University's nursing program was competitive and expensive, far beyond what she had thought possible with her current savings. You would do that? Miss Mitchell, the military spends millions of dollars trying to identify and develop the kind of natural leadership abilities you displayed in this living room. When we see those qualities in a young person who's already chosen a career in service to others, we pay attention. I don't know how to thank you. Succeed. Become the nurse you're meant to be. Use those steady hands and level heads to help people. That's enough, thanks. General Patterson moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Jake's asthma episode. You researched pediatric first aid after it happened, didn't you? Sarah nodded, surprised he knew. That's what separates good people from great ones. Good people handle the crisis in front of them. Great people prepare for the next one. He smiled. I have a feeling we'll be hearing about Sarah Mitchell again someday. After he left, Sarah sat alone in the quiet living room, turning the metal over in her hands. Through the window, she could see the lights of Fort Braxton in the distance, a reminder of the community that had reached out to acknowledge her actions. Upstairs, she could hear the soft sounds of the children sleeping peacefully. Tomorrow would bring another ordinary day of homework help and bedtime stories. But Sarah understood now that sometimes the most extraordinary moments happen in most ordinary places, and that courage doesn't always wear a uniform. The news of Sarah's recognition spread through Oakwood Heights faster than she had anticipated. By the following weekend, neighbors who had barely acknowledged her before were stopping to congratulate her on the street. Mrs. Chun from the corner house brought over homemade cookies, and Mr. Rodriguez, a retired Army sergeant himself, made a point of shaking her hand during his morning walk. But it was the phone call from her guidance counselor, Ms. Thompson, that truly caught Sarah off guard. Sarah, I just received the most remarkable call from State University's admissions office, Ms. Thompson said, her voice barely containing excitement. They want to fast-track your application for their nursing program, and there's preliminary approval for a full academic scholarship. Sarah nearly dropped the phone. She had submitted her application months ago, but hadn't expected to hear anything until spring. Are you sure they have the right person? Very sure. Apparently, General Patterson provided such a compelling recommendation that the scholarship committee wants to interview you next week. Sarah, this is the kind of opportunity that changes lives. The interview was scheduled for the following Thursday at the university's Health Sciences building. Sarah spent the entire week researching the program, reviewing basic medical terminology, and practicing answers to potential questions. She borrowed a professional outfit from her older cousin and arrived 30 minutes early, her portfolio containing her high school transcripts, volunteer certificates, and a carefully written essay about her career goals. The interview panel consisted of Dr. Amanda Foster, the nursing program director, Professor Janet Williams, who specialized in emergency care education, and surprisingly, a familiar face, Dr. Marcus Reed, the emergency room physician who had treated Jake at Regional Medical Center. Miss Mitchell, Dr. Foster began, we've had the opportunity to review General Patterson's recommendation, as well as Dr. Reed's first-hand account of your actions during the medical emergency. What we'd like to understand better is your thought process during that situation. Sarah took a deep breath. When I saw Jake struggling to breathe, my first instinct was to remove any additional stressors from the environment. That's why I sent Emma upstairs, not just to protect her, but to allow me to focus completely on Jake without worrying about how the situation might affect her. Dr. Reed leaned forward. You mentioned in your essay that you researched pediatric first aid after the incident. What specifically did you learn that you wished you had known beforehand? I learned about the specific positioning techniques that can help during an asthma attack, and I discovered that there are different severities of attacks that require different responses. I also realized I should have been timing his breathing rate and noting the exact symptoms to relay to the paramedics. I've since completed a pediatric CPR certification course. Professor Williams made a note. That shows excellent self-reflection and initiative. Tell us about a time when you had to make a difficult decision with limited information. Sarah considered the question carefully. Last year, I was babysitting for a different family when their 4-year-old daughter fell off her bike and hit her head. She seemed fine initially, no loss of consciousness, no obvious injury, but about an hour later, she started complaining of a headache and seemed drowsy. I had to decide whether to call the parents, who were at an important work event, or wait and see if she improved. What did you decide? I called them immediately. It turned out she had a mild concussion. The doctor said bringing her in when I did prevented any complications. The parents were grateful, even though it meant leaving their event early. Dr. Foster smiled. That demonstrates exactly the kind of judgment we look for in our students. You understand that erring on the side of caution, especially when children are involved, is always the right choice. The interview continued for another 40 minutes, covering topics from Sarah's academic background to her long-term career goals. When it concluded, Dr. Foster walked her to the elevator. Sarah, I want you to know that your actions at the Hendricks home demonstrate the kind of clinical thinking and composure that typically takes years to develop. The fact that you acted on instinct with such sound judgment suggests you have a natural aptitude for this field. 2 days later, Sarah received the official acceptance letter along with notification of a full 4-year scholarship that covered tuition, books, and living expenses. The letter included a note from General Patterson. Congratulations on your acceptance. I have no doubt you'll make an excellent nurse. The scholarship committee was as impressed with your character as I was. The news prompted a celebration dinner at the Mitchell family home. Sarah's parents, both hardworking people who had worried about affording college tuition, were emotional as they read the scholarship details. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart, her mother said, wiping away tears. Not just for getting the scholarship, but for being the kind of person who deserves it. Sarah's younger brother, typically more interested in video games than family conversations, looked up from his phone. So you're famous now? Like, is the military famous? I'm not famous, Danny. I just helped someone when they needed it. Yeah. But General Patterson told Dad that people at the base are calling you the babysitter who saved a life. That's pretty cool. Sarah learned just how much her story had resonated when Colonel Hendricks called to invite her to a special ceremony at Fort Braxton. The commanding general wants to present your medal officially, she explained. It would mean a lot to the base community, and honestly, it would mean a lot to our family. The ceremony was scheduled for the following month, giving Sarah time to process everything that had happened. She continued babysitting for the Hendricks family, but the dynamic had subtly changed. Jake now introduced her to friends as Sarah, who saved my life, and Emma had taken to drawing pictures of Sarah wearing a superhero cape. More significantly, word had spread to other military families in the area. Sarah received calls from 3 other families requesting her babysitting services, specifically mentioning that they had heard about her emergency response capabilities. She found herself in the unusual position of being a babysitter with references from a 3-star general. One of these new families, the Washingtons, had twin boys with severe food allergies. Mrs. Washington, a Navy commander, spent an entire evening training Sarah on the proper use of EpiPens and emergency protocols. I've heard you have excellent judgment in crisis situations, she said. That's exactly what we need. As the ceremony date approached, Sarah realized her perspective on her future had fundamentally shifted. She had always wanted to help people, But now she understood the weight of responsibility that came with being trusted in emergency situations. The scholarship wasn't just financial assistance. It was an investment in her potential to make a difference. The night before the ceremony, Sarah sat in her room, looking at the medal General Patterson had given her. She thought about Jake's frightened face, the sound of the ambulance sirens, and the moment when his breathing finally stabilized. She thought about the paramedics who had praised her actions, the hospital staff who had treated her with respect despite her age, and the general who had seen fit to salute her. But mostly, she thought about the future. In 4 years, she would graduate with a nursing degree and begin a career dedicated to helping people in their most vulnerable moments. The scholarship would allow her to focus on her studies without the financial stress that had seemed insurmountable just weeks ago. Her phone buzzed with a text from Emma Hendricks. "Are you excited for tomorrow? Mommy says lots of important people want to meet you." Sarah smiled as she typed back, a little nervous but excited. "See you there." The truth was, she was more than a little nervous. The ceremony would be her first time on a military base, surrounded by career officers and enlisted personnel who had dedicated their lives to service. She wondered if she would measure up to their expectations, if her actions truly warranted the attention they were receiving. But as she looked at the medal one more time before placing it carefully in its box, Sarah realized that the real honor wasn't in the recognition itself. It was in knowing that when someone needed help, she had been ready. And more importantly, she was preparing herself to be ready again. The ceremony would be formal, with protocol and tradition she didn't fully understand. But the meaning behind it was simple. A community that valued courage and service had recognized those qualities in an unlikely place. A 19-year-old babysitter had demonstrated that heroism doesn't require a uniform or a title. It just requires the willingness to do what's right when it matters most. As Sarah finally turned off her light and settled in for the night, she couldn't help but think about all the children she might help in her future career, all the families who might depend on her steady hands and level head. Tomorrow's ceremony was just the beginning of a journey that had started with a frightened little boy who couldn't breathe and a teenager who refused to panic. The recognition was gratifying, but the real reward would come in the years ahead. In hospital rooms and emergency situations where her training and natural instincts would combine to make a difference in people's lives. General Patterson had seen something in her that she was only beginning to recognize in herself. And tomorrow, she would accept that recognition with the understanding that it came with a lifetime of responsibility to live up to it. The morning of the ceremony dawned crisp and clear, with autumn sunlight filtering through the maple trees lining the road to Fort Braxton. Sarah sat in the passenger seat of her father's car, smoothing down her navy blue dress for the dozenth time. Her mother had insisted on the formal outfit, complete with low heels that Sarah wasn't entirely comfortable walking in. "You sure you're ready for this, kiddo?" her father asked, glancing at her in the rearview mirror as they approached the base's main gate. "As ready as I'll ever be," Sarah replied, though her stomach was doing somersaults. She had researched military protocol online, learning about proper etiquette and what to expect during formal ceremonies. But nothing could quite prepare her for the reality of entering an active military installation. The security checkpoint was more thorough than she had anticipated. Guards in crisp uniforms examined their identification, checked their names against a visitor list, and provided temporary passes with specific instructions about where they could and couldn't go on base. Sarah noticed how the guards' demeanor shifted when they saw her name on the list. A subtle straightening of posture, a more respectful tone. "Miss Mitchell, Colonel Hendricks is waiting to escort you to the ceremony," one of the guards informed her. "She's in the visitor center just ahead." The visitor center was a modest building with displays showcasing the base's history and mission. Colonel Hendricks was waiting inside, dressed in her formal military uniform, with ribbons and decorations that spoke of years of distinguished service. But when she saw Sarah, her formal military bearing softened into a warm smile. "Sarah, you look wonderful," she said, embracing her like family. "Are you nervous?" "Completely terrified," Sarah admitted. Colonel Hendricks laughed. "That's perfectly normal. I was terrified at my first formal ceremony, too. The important thing to remember is that everyone here already respects you. This is just making it official." They were joined by Jake and Emma, both dressed in their best clothes and clearly excited by the unusual nature of the day. Jake immediately attached himself to Sarah's side, chattering about all the cool soldier stuff he had seen on base. "Sarah, are you going to be a soldier now?" Emma asked, taking her other hand. "No, sweetheart. I'm going to be a nurse." "But soldiers and nurses both help people, just in different ways." The ceremony was being held in the base's main auditorium, a large building that could accommodate several hundred people. As they approached, Sarah was surprised to see the parking lot nearly full and a steady stream of military personnel and their families entering the building. "This is bigger than I expected," Sarah's mother whispered. "Word travels fast in a military community," Colonel Hendricks explained. "When someone does something that resonates with our values, people want to show their support." Inside the auditorium, Sarah was amazed by the scope of the gathering. The front rows were filled with high-ranking officers, their uniforms adorned with insignia and decorations. Behind them sat enlisted personnel, their families, and what appeared to be members of the local civilian community. Sarah spotted several faces she recognized from around Oakwood Heights, including Mrs. Chun and Mr. Rodriguez, but it was the presence on the stage that truly took her breath away. General Patterson was there, along with several other officers she didn't recognize. At the center sat a woman whose uniform bore more stars than Sarah had ever seen in person. This had to be General Walsh, the 3-star general Colonel Hendricks had mentioned. "I know, sweetheart. But maybe some of these opportunities could help other people learn about emergency response or inspire other young people to pursue nursing." They ultimately decided to accept 3 interviews, one with the local television station, one with a regional radio program that focused on community heroes, and one with a nursing magazine that wanted to feature Sarah as part of their annual Spotlight on Emerging Professionals. The television interview was Sarah's first experience with professional media. The reporter, Jessica Chun, was professional but warm, conducting the interview in the Mitchell family's living room to create a comfortable atmosphere. "Sarah, when you think back to that evening with Jake, what goes through your mind?" Jessica asked. "Honestly, I mostly think about what I could have done better," Sarah replied. "I've learned so much about pediatric emergency response since then. One wish I had known more at the moment. But you saved his life with what you did know. The paramedics saved his life. I just made sure they had a chance to do their job." Jessica smiled at Sarah's persistent humility. "Your response has inspired other young people to pursue careers in healthcare. How does that make you feel?" Sarah considered the question carefully. It's amazing to think that something positive could come from what was honestly a terrifying experience. If other people decide to learn CPR or first aid because of my story, then maybe the next family that faces an emergency will be even better prepared than I was. The interview aired the following week, and Sarah was surprised by the positive response from her community. Teachers at her former high school reached out to ask if she would speak to current students about emergency preparedness. The local YMCA invited her to help promote their CPR certification classes. Even the city council mentioned her during a meeting about community preparedness initiatives, but it was a phone call from an unexpected source that truly caught Sarah's attention: Dr. Elizabeth Hartman, the director of pediatric emergency medicine at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, had seen the television interview and wanted to discuss an opportunity. "Miss Mitchell, I understand you're starting nursing school next fall," Dr. Hartman said during their phone conversation. I'd like to offer you a summer internship position in our pediatric emergency department. It's typically reserved for nursing students who have completed at least 2 years of coursework, but your demonstrated capabilities and instincts suggest you might benefit from early exposure to hospital emergency medicine." Sarah was speechless for a moment. Children's Hospital of Philadelphia was one of the most prestigious pediatric facilities in the country. "Dr. Hartman, I'm incredibly honored, but I haven't even started nursing school yet. I wouldn't know what to do. That's exactly why this could be valuable for you. You'd be working alongside experienced nurses and physicians, learning proper protocols and procedures to supplement the natural instincts you've already demonstrated. Think of it as advanced preparation for your formal education." The internship would run for 10 weeks during the summer before Sarah started college. She would shadow experienced emergency department nurses, attend training sessions on pediatric care, and participate in community outreach programs focused on emergency preparedness education. "There's one more aspect to this opportunity, Dr. Hartman continued. We'd like you to help develop educational materials for parents and caregivers about recognizing and responding to pediatric emergencies. Your perspective as someone who successfully handled such a situation without formal medical training could be invaluable." Sarah accepted the internship, understanding that it represented an incredible opportunity to deepen her knowledge before beginning her formal nursing education. The position would also provide her with real-world experience in the kind of high-pressure environment where she hoped to eventually work. News of the internship spread quickly through the Oakwood Heights community, reinforcing Sarah's growing reputation as someone destined for a career in emergency medicine. But it also brought unexpected challenges. Some of her peers seemed to view her opportunities with skepticism or resentment. "It must be nice to have one lucky moment turn into a full ride to college and now a prestigious internship," commented Jessica Walsh, a former classmate. During a chance encounter at the grocery store, Sarah felt stung by the implication that her achievements were unearned. "It wasn't luck, Jessica. It was 8 months of building trust with a family, staying calm during an emergency, and then working hard to improve my knowledge afterward." "Right, but some of us have been volunteering and working just as hard without getting newspaper articles written about us." The comment bothered Sarah more than she wanted to admit. She had always been modest about her achievements, but she was beginning to realize that some people would view her opportunities as undeserved regardless of her actions or qualifications. The conversation prompted a deeper discussion with her parents that evening. "Am I taking opportunities away from other people?" Sarah asked. "Jessica made it sound like I'm getting special treatment I haven't earned." Her father, a man of few words but deep wisdom, set down his newspaper and looked at his daughter seriously. "Sarah, you didn't ask for recognition. You didn't ask for scholarships or internships. You were offered these things because people who know what they're looking for recognized qualities in you that they value. The question isn't whether you deserve them, it's what you're going to do with them." "Your father's right," her mother added. "There will always be people who question success they haven't achieved themselves. But there will also be people whose lives you'll touch because you were in a position to help them. Focus on the second group." The wisdom of their words became clear during Sarah's next babysitting assignment with a new family. The Johnsons, Dr. and Mrs. Johnson, had specifically sought Sarah out after hearing about her emergency response experience. Their 6-year-old son, Tyler, had a severe peanut allergy, and they wanted a babysitter who could handle a potential anaphylactic emergency. During the initial meeting, Mrs. Johnson walked Sarah through Tyler's emergency action plan with the thoroughness of someone who understood that seconds could mean the difference between life and death. "Tyler is very good about asking before he eats anything," Mrs. Johnson explained, "but cross-contamination can happen anywhere. If he has a reaction, you'll need to administer his EpiPen immediately and call 911. Don't wait to see if he improves. The second injection is 15 minutes later if the paramedics haven't arrived. Sarah listened carefully, asking questions about symptoms to watch for and proper injection technique. She had researched anaphylaxis extensively after accepting the position, but hearing the protocols from Tyler's mother reinforced the seriousness of the responsibility. "I've heard you handle emergencies well," Dr. Johnson said as they concluded the orientation. "That's why we're comfortable leaving Tyler with you. We know you won't panic." The first few times Sarah babysat Tyler passed without incident, but she remained vigilant about his environment and food exposure. She learned to read ingredient labels with the scrutiny of someone who understood that overlooking a single item could have catastrophic consequences. The real test came on a Friday evening in late November. Sarah was helping Tyler with homework while his younger sister Chloe played nearby. Tyler was eating a snack his mother had prepared, apple slices with sunflower seed butter, which was safe for his allergies. About 20 minutes after finishing his snack, Tyler began complaining that his mouth felt funny. Sarah immediately went into assessment mode, asking him to describe the sensation while observing his face and behavior. "It's like tingling," Tyler said, touching his lips. "And my tongue feels thick." Sarah's training kicked in instantly. Tyler's face was beginning to show slight swelling around his eyes, and she could see the beginning of a rash on his neck. These were early signs of anaphylaxis. "Tyler, I need to give you your medicine now," Sarah said calmly, retrieving his EpiPen from its designated location. "Chloe, I need you to sit on the couch and stay there, okay?" Tyler, who had been through this drill many times with his parents, held still while Sarah administered the injection according to the protocol she had memorized. She immediately called 911, then called Tyler's parents. "This is Sarah Mitchell. I'm with Tyler and I've just given him his EpiPen for what appears to be an allergic reaction. I've called 911 and they're on their way." Mrs. Johnson's voice was tense but controlled. What were his symptoms? Tingling in his mouth, facial swelling, and a rash on his neck. The reaction started about 20 minutes after he finished his snack. "You did exactly right. We're leaving now and we'll meet you at the hospital." The paramedics arrived within 6 minutes, finding Tyler stable but still showing signs of reaction. They administered additional medication and transported him to the hospital, with Sarah riding along to provide continuity of care until his parents arrived. At the hospital, Tyler's condition stabilized quickly with proper treatment. The doctors determined that cross-contamination had occurred somewhere in the food preparation process. Despite all precautions, Dr. Johnson found Sarah in the waiting room after Tyler had been cleared for discharge. "Sarah, thank you for recognizing the symptoms so quickly and acting without hesitation. The doctor said your rapid response likely prevented a more serious reaction." "I'm just glad Tyler is okay," Sarah replied. "I was terrified I might miss something important." "That's exactly the right attitude. The fact that you take this responsibility seriously is why we trust you with our children." The incident reinforced for Sarah that her growing reputation for emergency response wasn't just about past recognition, it was about ongoing responsibility. Families were trusting her with their most precious possessions because they believed she would rise to the occasion when it mattered most. As she prepared for her summer internship and upcoming college career, Sarah understood that every emergency she handled successfully raised the bar for future expectations. But rather than feeling burdened by this pressure, she found it motivating. Each situation taught her something new, made her more confident in her abilities, and better prepared her for the career she was pursuing. The recognition she had received for helping Jake had opened doors, but it was her continued commitment to excellence and learning that would determine how far those doors would take her. The teenage babysitter who had once acted on instinct was becoming a young woman who combined natural ability with growing expertise, exactly the kind of healthcare professional the world needed. Winter arrived early in Oakwood Heights, bringing With it a series of events that would test Sarah's growing reputation in ways she never anticipated. The first snowfall of the season came in mid-December, blanketing the military housing community in pristine white and creating the kind of picturesque scene that made the base look like a postcard. Sarah was walking home from her volunteer shift at the local fire department, a new commitment she had taken on after several firefighters had reached out following her television interview, when she noticed unusual activity at the Morrison house 3 blocks from her own. Emergency vehicles were parked outside, their red and blue lights cutting through the gray afternoon light. Approaching cautiously, Sarah recognized Captain Lisa Morrison from the base, a single mother who had recently returned from deployment. Captain Morrison was standing in her front yard, talking animatedly with a police officer while gesturing toward her house. "Sarah," Captain Morrison called out when she spotted her. "Thank God you're here. I need help." Sarah quickened her pace, immediately shifting into the focused mindset that had become second nature when people needed assistance. "What's happening, Captain Morrison?" "My daughter Riley is missing. She's 8 years old, and she was supposed to come straight home from school, but she never arrived. The bus driver confirmed she got off at the right stop, but that was 2 hours ago." Sarah's mind immediately began processing the information. An 8-year-old missing for 2 hours in freezing weather was a serious emergency, especially with temperatures dropping rapidly as evening approached. "Have you checked with her friends' families?" Sarah asked, already knowing this would have been Captain Morrison's first step. "Called everyone I could think of. The police are organizing search party, but with this weather." Captain Morrison's voice trailed off, her military composure cracking under maternal fear. Officer David Sullivan, the policeman taking the report, looked up from his notepad. "Miss Mitchell, you're the young lady who's been in the news lately, aren't you? The one who handled that medical emergency?" "Yes, sir. We could use someone with good crisis management instincts. The neighborhood kids know you, and they might respond better to a familiar face than to uniforms." Sarah nodded, already formulating a mental checklist. "Captain Morrison, does Riley have any favorite places she likes to go? Anywhere she might have stopped on the way home?" "There's a small playground about halfway between the bus stop and our house. She likes to swing there sometimes, but I've already checked. It's empty." "What about indoor places? Somewhere she might have gone when it got cold?" Captain Morrison thought for a moment. "There's an old maintenance shed behind the playground. The kids sometimes play around it, but it's supposed to be locked." Within minutes, a search plan was taking shape. The police coordinated with base security to organize search teams covering different areas of the neighborhood. Sarah volunteered to focus on places where a child might seek shelter from the cold, reasoning that Riley, if lost or scared, would prioritize warmth over visibility. She began with the maintenance shed Captain Morrison had mentioned, finding it indeed locked but noticing small footprints in the snow leading around to the back. Following the trail, Sarah discovered that one of the rear windows had been partially pried open, just enough for a small child to squeeze through. "Riley?" Sarah called softly through the opening. "Riley, are you in there? It's Sarah Mitchell. Your mom sent me to find you." A faint sound came from inside the shed, not quite a voice, but definitely movement. "Riley, I'm going to come in through the window, okay? Don't be scared." Sarah managed to squeeze through the narrow opening, grateful for her slender build. Inside the shed, she found Riley huddled in the corner behind some old equipment, wrapped in a tarp and shivering violently. "Hey there," Sarah said gently, approaching slowly so as not to frighten the child. "Your mom is really worried about you." "Are you hurt?" Riley shook her head but didn't speak. Sarah could see that the little girl was cold, scared, and possibly embarrassed about whatever had led to her hiding in the shed. "It's okay if you don't want to talk right now," Sarah continued, removing her own coat and wrapping it around Riley's shoulders. "But we need to get you somewhere warm. Can you walk?" Riley nodded, and Sarah helped her to her feet. As they made their way toward the window, Riley finally spoke in a small voice. "I didn't want to go home." Sarah paused, recognizing that this wasn't just a case of a lost child. There was something more complex happening here. "Can you tell me why?" "I failed my math test. Mom gets really mad when I fail tests, especially since she came back from being away. She says I have to be strong and responsible because she's not always going to be there." Sarah's heart ached for the little girl, understanding now that Riley's disappearance was less about being lost and more about being afraid of disappointing her mother. Captain Morrison, dealing with the stress of reintegration after deployment, had probably been stricter than usual, not realizing the pressure her daughter was feeling. "Riley, your mom isn't mad about any test right now. She's just scared because she didn't know where you were. Do you think we could go talk to her together?" The reunion between mother and daughter was emotional, with Captain Morrison alternating between relief and gentle scolding. But Sarah noticed the tension that remained between them, the way Riley seemed to shrink into herself when her mother asked about the math test. "Captain Morrison, could I speak with you privately for a moment?" Sarah asked after Riley had been checked by the paramedics and declared physically unharmed. They stepped aside, and Sarah chose her words carefully. "I think Riley was more scared of disappointing you than she was of the cold. She mentioned feeling pressure to be strong and responsible." Captain Morrison's expression shifted from relief to concern. "I've been so focused on getting back into routine after deployment that I may have been too hard on her. The transition has been difficult for both of us. Maybe this could be an opportunity to talk about that transition together. Riley clearly loves you and wants to make you proud. She just needs to know that failing a math test doesn't change that." The conversation led to Captain Morrison seeking family counseling through the base's support services, recognizing that both she and Riley needed help navigating the challenges of post-deployment reintegration. Sarah's insight had not only helped locate a missing child, but had identified the underlying family dynamics that had caused the crisis in the first place. Incident attracted attention from the base community once again, but this time Sarah was more prepared for the recognition. She had learned to accept gratitude gracefully while redirecting focus to the broader issues, in this case, the importance of supporting military families during transitions. Colonel Patricia Banks, the base's Family Readiness Group coordinator, contacted Sarah the following week with an unusual request. "Miss Mitchell, I've been following your various interventions in our community, and I'm impressed by your ability to see beyond the immediate crisis to underlying issues. I'd like to offer you a position as a volunteer family liaison. The role would involve working with military families who were dealing with various stresses, deployment, reintegration, relocation, or other military-specific challenges. Sarah would serve as a bridge between families and base support services, helping identify needs and connect people with appropriate resources. You have a gift for making people feel comfortable opening up to you," Colonel Banks explained. "That's a rare skill, and it could be valuable in helping families before they reach crisis points." Sarah accepted the position, understanding that it would provide her with experience in crisis intervention and family dynamics that would complement her nursing education. The role also meant she would be working more closely with the military community, deepening her understanding of the unique pressures faced by service members and their families. Her first assignment came sooner than expected. Sergeant First Class Maria Gonzalez, a medic who had recently returned from Afghanistan, was struggling with nightmares and anxiety that were affecting her ability to care for her two young sons. The situation had come to Colonel Banks' attention when the boys' teachers reported that they seemed exhausted and distracted at school. Sarah approached the situation with the same careful assessment she had used in previous crises. She spent time with the Gonzalez family, observing their interactions and listening to their concerns without judgment. "I feel like I'm failing them," Sergeant Gonzalez confided during one of their conversations. "I was strong enough to serve overseas, but I can't seem to handle bedtime stories without having flashbacks." "Strength isn't about never having problems," Sarah replied. "It's about getting help when you need it so you can take care of the people who depend on you." Through gentle encouragement and practical support, Sarah helped Sergeant Gonzalez connect with the base's mental health services while also arranging temporary child care assistance during her therapy appointments. The intervention was successful, with Sergeant Gonzalez eventually reporting significant improvement in her symptoms and family relationships. These experiences were teaching Sarah valuable lessons about the complexity of helping people. Each situation required not just immediate problem solving, but understanding of broader contexts, family dynamics, and available resources. She was developing skills in assessment, communication, and resource coordination that would serve her well in her nursing career. The spring semester brought new challenges as Sarah prepared for her summer internship at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. She had been accepted to State University's nursing program and would begin classes in the fall, but the internship represented her first formal exposure to hospital medicine. Dr. Hartman called to discuss the specific focus of Sarah's internship program. "We've designed your experience around 3 key areas: clinical observation, community outreach, and educational material development. You'll rotate through different departments, but we'll emphasize pediatric emergency medicine since that aligns with your demonstrated interests and abilities." The internship would also include a research component. Sarah would work with a team developing training materials for childcare providers about recognizing and responding to medical emergencies. Her unique perspective as someone who had successfully handled such situations without formal medical training made her input particularly valuable. "We want to understand what enabled you to respond so effectively," Dr. Hartman explained. "If we can identify those factors, we might be able to better prepare other caregivers for similar situations." As Sarah prepared for this next phase of her journey, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that Tuesday evening when Jake couldn't breathe. What had started as a routine babysitting shift had evolved into recognition, opportunities, and responsibilities she never could have imagined. But perhaps most importantly, she had discovered that her ability to remain calm in crises wasn't just a personal trait. It was a skill that could be developed, taught, and shared with others. The internship would give her the chance to learn from medical professionals while contributing her own insights to the field of emergency preparedness. The teenage babysitter, who had once acted purely on instinct, was becoming a young woman who understood the science behind effective emergency response. And as she looked toward her future career in nursing, Sarah knew that every challenge she had faced in Oakwood Heights had prepared her for the greater challenges that lay ahead in hospital emergency departments, where split-second decisions could mean the difference between life and death for patients she had yet to meet. 5 years had passed since that pivotal Tuesday evening when Sarah Mitchell first demonstrated the composure that would shape her future. Now 24 years old and in her final semester of nursing school, Sarah stood in the pediatric emergency department at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, no longer an uncertain teenager but a confident student nurse whose reputation had followed her throughout her education. Her summer internship had evolved into a part-time position that continued through her college years, allowing her to gain practical experience while completing her degree. The educational materials she had helped develop were now used in hospitals across the country, and her case studies had become standard components of emergency response training programs. Dr. Hartman found Sarah reviewing patient charts during her shift, preparing for the senior nursing practicum that would complete her degree requirements. "Sarah, I have something I'd like to discuss with you," Dr. Hartman said, gesturing toward her office. "It's about your post-graduation plans." Sarah followed her mentor into the office, curious about what seemed to be a significant conversation. Over the past 5 years, Dr. Hartman had become not just a supervisor but a trusted advisor who had guided Sarah's development as both a healthcare professional and a leader in emergency preparedness education. "I've received a call from the Department of Health and Human Services," Dr. Hartman began. "They're developing a new national initiative for pediatric emergency preparedness, and they want someone to lead the civilian training component. Your name came up repeatedly during their search process." Sarah was stunned. "A national program?" "The idea is to create standardized training protocols for childcare providers, teachers, babysitters, and other civilians who work with children. Your original case with Jake Hendricks has been cited in numerous studies as an example of ideal civilian response, and your subsequent work in training development has been equally impressive. The position would be based in Washington, D.C., working with federal agencies, medical institutions, and educational organizations to develop and implement comprehensive emergency response training for civilian caregivers. It represented an opportunity to impact emergency preparedness on a scale Sarah had never imagined possible. "Dr. Hartman, I'm honored, but I'm not sure I'm qualified for something that significant. I'm about to graduate from nursing school, not lead federal initiatives." "Sarah, qualifications aren't just about degrees and certifications. You have something more valuable, real experience combined with the ability to translate that experience into actionable knowledge for others. The committee reviewing candidates isn't looking for the most experienced nurse. They're looking for someone who understands both the civilian perspective and the medical requirements." The conversation prompted Sarah to reflect on her journey from that frightened teenager, calling 911 to a nursing student being considered for national leadership roles. Each experience had built upon the previous ones, creating a foundation of knowledge and confidence that she was only now beginning to fully appreciate. That evening, Sarah called her parents to discuss the opportunity. The conversation took place in the same kitchen where she had first told them about Jake's asthma attack, though the circumstances were dramatically different now. "It sounds like an incredible opportunity, sweetheart," her mother said, "but it's also a big responsibility. Are you ready for that level of pressure?" "I think the question is whether I'm ready to pass up the chance to help prevent other families from going through what Hendricks went through," Sarah replied. "If I can help create better training programs, maybe other babysitters won't have to figure things out on their own in the middle of an emergency." Her father, characteristically practical, asked the question that had been nagging at Sarah. "What?" "About your original plan to work in a hospital emergency department. You've been preparing for that for 5 years. I'll still be working in emergency medicine, just from a different angle. Instead of treating individual patients, I'd be preparing thousands of people to provide better initial care before professional help arrives." The decision ultimately came down to Sarah's understanding of where she could make the greatest impact. Her experience had taught her that the most critical moments in any emergency often occurred before trained medical professionals arrived on scene. If she could improve civilian response capabilities across the country, she could potentially save more lives than she ever could working in a single hospital. 3 weeks later, Sarah received official confirmation of her selection for the position. The announcement came with a formal ceremony at the Department of Health and Human Services, attended by officials from multiple agencies and representatives from medical institutions across the country. General Patterson, now retired but still following Sarah's career, was present for the ceremony. During the reception, he approached her with the same warm smile she remembered from their first meeting in the Hendricks living room. "Miss Mitchell, or should I say Director Mitchell now," he said with obvious pride. "I had a feeling that the fuzzy young babysitter would go on to do remarkable things. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't even believe in myself, General. None of this would have happened without that first recognition. The recognition didn't create your abilities, Sarah, it just helped you recognize them yourself. The ceremony included presentations about the scope of the new national program. Sarah would oversee the development of training curricula for different civilian populations, coordinate with state and local agencies to implement programs, and establish evaluation metrics to measure effectiveness. The initiative represented a $50 million federal investment in civilian emergency preparedness, with Sarah as the youngest department director in the agency's history. But perhaps the most meaningful moment of the ceremony came when Jake Hendricks, now 10 years old, was brought forward to meet the woman whose quick thinking had saved his life 5 years earlier. He had grown into a confident, healthy child with no lasting effects from his severe asthma attack. "Miss Sarah, my mom says you're going to teach other people how to help kids like me," Jake said, his voice clear and strong. "That's right, Jake. I want to make sure that if any child has trouble breathing like you did, the adults taking care of them will know exactly what to do. Will you teach them to stay calm like you did?" Sarah knelt down to Jake's eye level. "I'll try to teach them that staying calm helps you think clearly, and thinking clearly helps you help other people." Jake nodded seriously, then surprised everyone by giving Sarah a heartfelt hug. "Thank you for saving my life and for helping other kids too." The exchange captured the essence of what the new program was designed to achieve, translating one young woman's instinctive response to crisis into systematic preparation that could benefit children and families across the nation. As Sarah began her new role, she established her first office in a building just blocks from the Capitol, surrounded by policymakers and federal agencies, but always mindful of families like the Hendricks who would ultimately benefit from her work. Her team included emergency medicine physicians, education specialists, child development experts, and communications professionals, all working together to create comprehensive training programs. The first pilot program was launched in military communities, a fitting tribute to where Sarah's story had begun. Fort Braxton was selected as one of the initial test sites, bringing Sarah's work full circle to the place where her actions had first been recognized. Colonel Rebecca Hendricks, now promoted to full colonel and serving as base commander, personally welcomed Sarah back to Fort Braxton for the pilot program launch. "Sarah, it's remarkable to see how far you've come from the teenager who used to babysit my children," Colonel Hendricks said as they toured the base's new emergency preparedness training facility. "But I'm not surprised. You've always had the ability to see what needed to be done and then do it." The pilot program exceeded all expectations, with participating families reporting significantly higher confidence levels in emergency response and measurably improved performance in simulated crisis scenarios. The success at Fort Braxton and other military installations paved the way for nationwide expansion of the program. 2 years into her role as director, Sarah received a call that brought her story full circle in the most unexpected way. The caller was Captain Tyler Johnson, the same Tyler whose anaphylactic reaction she had successfully managed during her babysitting years. Now 18 and preparing for college, Tyler had been inspired by Sarah's career path to pursue emergency medicine himself. "Miss Mitchell, I wanted to thank you for more than just saving my life that night," Tyler said during their phone conversation. "Watching how you handled that emergency and learning about your career afterward showed me that helping people in crisis situations could be a calling, not just a job." Tyler had been accepted to medical school with plans to specialize in emergency medicine, specifically focusing on allergic reactions and anaphylaxis research. Sarah arranged for him to spend a summer internship with her department, working on educational materials about food allergy emergency response. "You know," Tyler said during one of their working sessions, "I've been thinking about that night. When I was 6 years old, I remember feeling scared, but I also remember feeling safe because you knew what to do. That's what I want other kids to feel when they're having medical emergencies." Sarah realized that Tyler's perspective, that of someone who had been saved by civilian emergency response, added a crucial dimension to their training materials. His insights about what it felt like to be the patient helped the team develop more effective communication strategies for emergency responders. As Sarah approached her third year as director, the national program had trained over 100,000 civilian caregivers across all 50 states. Emergency response statistics showed measurable improvements in patient outcomes for pediatric emergencies where trained civilians had provided initial care. The program had achieved its primary goal of improving the critical minutes before professional medical help arrived, but perhaps more importantly, Sarah had created a network of trained responders who understood that extraordinary circumstances could arise in the most ordinary moments, and that ordinary people could rise to meet those circumstances with the right preparation and mindset. On a quiet evening in her Washington apartment, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from a teenager folding laundry in Oakwood Heights to a federal director impacting emergency preparedness nationwide. The medal General Patterson had given her years earlier sat on her bookshelf, a reminder of where it all began. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Emma Hendricks, now a high school senior preparing for her own college applications. Sarah, I'm writing my college essay about heroes, and I'm writing about you. Not because you saved Jake, but because you turned one moment of helping someone into a lifetime of helping everyone. You showed me that being a hero isn't about one big moment. It's about deciding every day to use your abilities to help other people. Sarah smiled, understanding that Emma had grasped something that had taken Sarah years to fully comprehend. The salute from General Patterson, the scholarship, the recognition, none of it had been about that single Tuesday evening when Jake couldn't breathe. It was about recognizing someone who would continue to rise to meet challenges, who would transform personal experience into broader service, and who would inspire others to do the same. The babysitter, who had once called 911 in a moment of crisis, had become a leader who ensured that the next generation of caregivers would be better prepared for their own moments of crisis. And somewhere across the country, a child's life would be saved because a babysitter, teacher, or daycare worker had received training inspired by a 19-year-old who had simply refused to panic when someone needed her help. Sarah understood now that true heroism wasn't found in a single moment of courage, but in the commitment to ensure that moment of courage created lasting value for others. The general had saluted not just her actions, but her potential that had been realized not through fame or recognition, but through years of quiet dedication to preparing others for the moments when courage would be required. The success of the national program attracted international attention, leading to Sarah's invitation to speak at the World Health Organization's Global Emergency Preparedness Summit in Geneva. Standing before delegates from 47 countries, Sarah shared the story that had begun in a suburban living room and evolved into a worldwide model for civilian emergency response training. The most sophisticated medical equipment in the world cannot replace the value of a prepared caregiver who remains calm in crisis, Sarah told the assembly. Every child deserves to have adults around them who know how to bridge the gap between emergency and intervention. Following her presentation, delegates from 3 different countries requested consultations about implementing similar programs in their healthcare systems. Sarah found herself advising governments on emergency preparedness policy, a responsibility that would have seemed impossible to imagine during her babysitting days in Oakwood Heights. The international recognition led to an unexpected phone call from her old mentor, Dr. Hartman, who had been following Sarah's career trajectory with obvious pride. "Sarah, I have a proposition that might interest you," Dr. Hartman said during their conversation. "The medical school here is developing a new curriculum track focused on emergency preparedness and civilian response coordination. They want to offer you a faculty position. You'd be designing and teaching the courses that prepare the next generation of emergency medicine physicians to work effectively with civilian first responders." The offer represented another evolution in Sarah's career, an opportunity to directly influence how future doctors would approach emergency situations involving civilian caregivers. Her unique perspective, having been both the civilian responder and the policymaker, made her ideally suited to bridge the gap between medical training and real-world emergency response. The interesting thing, Dr. Hartman continued, is that the medical students would learn not just clinical skills, but how to recognize and build upon the natural instincts of people like you were at 19. Your case studies have shown us that good civilian responders often make excellent healthcare professionals when given proper training. Sarah accepted the position, understanding that it would allow her to influence emergency medicine from yet another angle. Her first semester of teaching proved to be as educational for her as it was for her students. Medical students who had spent years learning to rely on sophisticated diagnostic equipment and extensive clinical protocols were initially skeptical about the value of civilian intuition and basic response techniques, but Sarah's teaching method was experiential rather than theoretical. She presented her students with the same scenario she had faced with Jake Hendricks, but from multiple perspectives: the civilian caregiver, the emergency dispatcher, the paramedics, and the hospital staff. Students began to understand how each link in the emergency response chain was crucial to positive outcomes. Dr. Mitchell, one student asked during a particularly engaging class discussion, "How do you teach someone to have the kind of instincts you demonstrated? Can courage and composure really be learned?" Sarah considered the question carefully, drawing on years of experience training civilian responders. "I don't think courage is something you either have or don't have. I think it's something you develop through preparation, practice, and understanding that your response in crisis moments can make the difference between life and death for someone else. The more prepared you are, the more confident you become. The more confident you are, the calmer you remain, and calm, prepared people make better decisions." Her teaching philosophy began attracting attention from other medical schools, leading to guest lectures and eventually to the development of a standardized curriculum that was adopted by over 30 medical schools nationwide. Sarah's influence was now extending beyond civilian training to shape how future physicians were educated about emergency response. But it was a personal letter that arrived 5 years into her teaching career that reminded Sarah of the individual lives behind all the policy initiatives and training programs. The letter was from Maria Santos, the newspaper reporter who had first written about Sarah's story. "Dear Sarah," the letter began, "I wanted you to know that the article I wrote about you 7 years ago changed my life in ways I never expected. My daughter was diagnosed with severe asthma last year, and because of your story, I had already taken pediatric CPR classes and knew how to respond when she had her first serious attack. I was able to keep her stable until paramedics arrived, and the doctor said my quick response prevented what could have been a tragic outcome. Thank you for showing all of us that ordinary people can learn to do extraordinary things." The letter was one of dozens Sarah had received over the years from people whose lives had been touched by her story or by the training programs she had developed. Parents who had successfully managed their children's emergencies, teachers who had saved students during medical crises, and babysitters who had remained calm during situations that could have been disasters. Each letter reinforced Sarah's understanding that the ripple effects of that Tuesday evening with Jake Hendricks continued to expand in ways she might never fully know. The programs she had created were now reaching second-generation beneficiaries, children whose parents had been trained because of initiatives Sarah had developed, creating an expanding network of prepared caregivers. As Sarah approached her 10th year since beginning her federal role, she received an invitation that brought her story full circle once again. The military community at Fort Braxton was dedicating a new emergency preparedness training center, and they wanted Sarah to be the keynote speaker at the dedication ceremony. Standing at the podium in the same auditorium where General Patterson had first saluted her, Sarah looked out at an audience that included many familiar faces from her early days in Oakwood Heights, as well as new faces representing the continuing mission of emergency preparedness education. 10 years ago, I stood on this stage as a teenager being honored for actions I had taken instinctively, without training or preparation, Sarah began. Today, I stand here as an educator and policymaker who has dedicated her career to ensuring that the next generation of civilian responders won't have to rely on instinct alone. In the audience, she spotted Jake Hendricks, now 15 years old and considering his own future career path. Emma Hendricks sat beside him, home from college where she was studying education with plans to become a teacher who could provide emergency response training to her future students. The goal was never to turn every civilian into a medical professional, Sarah continued. The goal was to ensure that every civilian who finds themselves responsible for someone else's safety in an emergency has the basic knowledge, confidence, and preparation to bridge the gap between crisis and professional intervention. After the ceremony, Sarah was approached by Captain Jennifer Walsh, daughter of the 3-star general who had attended Sarah's original medal ceremony years earlier. Captain Walsh had been inspired by Sarah's story to pursue a career in military medicine, specializing in emergency response training for deployed personnel. Miss Mitchell, I wanted to thank you for showing my generation that leadership comes in many forms, Captain Walsh said. Your example taught me that the most important qualification for leadership isn't rank or position. It's the willingness to take responsibility when others need you. That evening, Sarah walked through the streets of Oakwood Heights, past the house where she had first babysat Jake and Emma, past the playground where she had found Riley Morrison hiding in the maintenance shed, past all the places where her understanding of service and responsibility had been shaped by real experiences with real families. Facing real crises, she thought about the thousands of people who had been trained through programs she had developed, the medical students who would become doctors with a deeper appreciation for civilian capabilities, and the policymakers who now understood that emergency preparedness was most effective when it included everyone, not just professionals, but mostly she thought about the children, past, present, and future, who would benefit from having adults around them who were prepared, confident, and capable of providing effective help during medical emergencies. Children like Jake, whose breathing crisis had started it all, and countless others whose names she would never know but whose lives might be saved because someone, somewhere had received training inspired by a teenager who had simply refused to panic when a little boy couldn't breathe. In the end, Sarah Mitchell had become exactly what General Patterson had seen in her that evening in the Hendricks living room, a leader who understood that the greatest service comes not from seeking recognition, but from ensuring that recognition creates opportunities to serve others. The teenage babysitter had grown into a woman who embodied the military values that had first honored her: duty, service, and the unwavering commitment to be ready when others needed her most. The story that had begun with a single salute had become a legacy of preparation, education, and empowerment that would continue long after Sarah herself had moved on to other challenges. And somewhere, in a house not unlike the one where it all started, another civilian caregiver was staying calm, making smart decisions, and saving a life, equipped with knowledge and confidence that traced its origins back to a 19-year-old babysitter who had shown the world that heroism comes not from wearing a uniform, but from being ready to serve when service is needed most. 3 months after the Fort Braxton dedication ceremony, Sarah received an unexpected visitor at her university office. Dr. Amanda Foster, her former nursing program director, arrived with news that would challenge Sarah to consider yet another evolution in her career. Sarah, I've been appointed to head a new initiative for the Centers for Disease Control, Dr. Foster explained. We're developing a rapid response training program for civilian populations during public health emergencies. After what we learned during the pandemic about the critical role of trained civilians in emergency response, There's federal funding for a comprehensive program that goes beyond individual medical emergencies to community-wide crisis management. The position would involve creating training protocols for civilians who might need to serve as emergency coordinators during natural disasters, disease outbreaks, or other large-scale crises. Sarah's unique combination of civilian emergency experience, policy development expertise, and educational background made her the ideal candidate to design curricula that could prepare ordinary citizens for extraordinary circumstances. The scope would be massive, Dr. Foster continued. We're talking about training programs for community leaders, school administrators, business managers, religious leaders, anyone who might find themselves responsible for groups of people. During emergencies, your work has shown that proper training can enable civilians to make life-saving decisions. We want to scale that concept to community-level response. Sarah was intrigued but cautious. Dr. Foster, that sounds like it would require leaving my teaching position and the medical training programs I've developed. I'm not sure I'm ready to abandon work that's finally showing a measurable impact on emergency medicine education. Actually, we're proposing something different. We want you to maintain your academic affiliations while serving as the chief architect of this new program. You'd be developing training that medical schools, nursing programs, and other healthcare education institutions would incorporate into their community outreach requirements. The conversation prompted Sarah to consider how her influence could extend beyond individual emergency response to systemic community preparedness. Her experience had taught her that effective emergency response required coordination between trained civilians and professional responders, but she had never considered the broader implications for community-wide crisis management. 2 weeks later, Sarah found herself in Atlanta at the CDC headquarters, meeting with epidemiologists, emergency management specialists, and public policy experts who were designing the framework for community emergency preparedness training. The team included professionals who had managed responses to hurricanes, wildfires, disease outbreaks, and other large-scale emergencies. Dr. Mitchell, said Dr. Robert Chun, the CDC's Director of Emergency Preparedness, your case studies have shown us that effective civilian response requires 3 key elements: preparation, confidence, and clear protocols. We want to apply those same principles to community-level emergency management. The initial pilot program would focus on training community leaders to coordinate civilian response during various types of emergencies. Sarah would design the core curriculum, drawing on her years of experience understanding how untrained individuals could be quickly prepared to handle critical responsibilities. But the real innovation of the program was its integration with existing emergency response systems. Rather than creating separate civilian and professional response tracks, Sarah's design would ensure that community leaders understood how to interface effectively with professional emergency management, medical personnel, and other official responders. The first community selected for the pilot program was Cedar Falls, Iowa, a town of 40,000 people that had experienced significant flooding, tornadoes, and a chemical plant accident within the previous 5 years. The city's emergency management director, Captain Lisa Rodriguez, retired Army, had specifically requested inclusion in the pilot program after learning about Sarah's background. We've learned that professional emergency responders can't be everywhere at once during large-scale crises, Captain Rodriguez explained during Sarah's initial site visit. We need trained civilians who can coordinate neighborhood-level responses while we handle the bigger picture coordination. Sarah spent 2 weeks in Cedar Falls, observing existing emergency response protocols and interviewing community members about their experiences during previous crises. She discovered that many residents had demonstrated remarkable resourcefulness and cooperation during emergencies, but their efforts had been largely uncoordinated and sometimes counterproductive to official response efforts. What we need, Sarah realized, isn't just training for emergency response techniques. We need training for emergency leadership, how to organize people, coordinate resources, communicate with authorities, and maintain morale during extended crisis situations. The Cedar Falls pilot program launched 6 months later with 150 community participants representing schools, churches, businesses, neighborhood associations, and civic organizations. Sarah's curriculum included modules on crisis communication, resource coordination, psychological first aid, and integration with professional emergency response systems. But the most innovative aspect of the program was its emphasis on adaptive leadership, preparing civilians to make decisions and take initiative in situations that hadn't been specifically covered in their training. Sarah drew on her own experience of having to improvise during Jake's asthma attack, understanding that real emergencies rarely followed exactly the scenarios covered in training programs. The training culminated in a comprehensive simulation exercise that tested the participants' ability to coordinate community response to a simulated tornado outbreak. Professional emergency responders participated as observers and evaluators, assessing how effectively the trained civilians integrated their efforts with official response protocols. The results exceeded all expectations. Trained community leaders demonstrated remarkable effectiveness in organizing evacuation assistance, coordinating emergency shelters, managing resource distribution, and maintaining communication with professional responders. Most significantly, they showed the kind of calm, systematic decision-making that Sarah had first demonstrated as a teenager, evidence that her core insight about preparation, enabling confidence, was scalable to much larger and more complex situations. Dr. Chen called Sarah personally after reviewing the simulation results. "Sarah, this is the most successful community preparedness pilot we've ever conducted. The trained civilians didn't just follow protocols, they demonstrated genuine leadership capabilities that enhanced overall emergency response effectiveness." Based on the Cedar Falls success, the CDC approved funding for nationwide expansion of the Community Emergency Leadership Training Program. Sarah would oversee implementation in 50 communities across the country, each representing different demographic, geographic, and economic characteristics to ensure the program's effectiveness across diverse populations. The expansion brought Sarah's influence full circle in an unexpected way. One of the selected communities was Oakwood Heights, the military housing area where her story had begun. Colonel Hendricks, now serving as base commander, personally requested inclusion in the program. "Sarah, it would be meaningful for our community to participate in a program created by someone who first demonstrated these leadership qualities right here in our neighborhood," Colonel Hendricks said during their planning call. "Many of the families who witnessed your early emergency responses are still stationed here, and they're excited about the opportunity to develop similar capabilities." Returning to Oakwood Heights to implement the training program she had designed was profoundly emotional for Sarah. She conducted training sessions in the same community center where she had once attended school events, worked with families she had known for years, and walked past the house where Jake's asthma attack had first revealed her potential for emergency leadership. During one of the training sessions, she was approached by Mrs. Patricia Williams, a neighbor who had watched Sarah grow up in the community. "Sarah, I remember you as the quiet teenager who babysat for half the families in this neighborhood," Mrs. Williams said. "Now you're back as a national expert training us to be community emergency leaders. It's remarkable to see how far that young girl's courage has taken her." Sarah smiled, understanding that Mrs. Williams was witnessing something that had taken Sarah herself years to recognize, that her journey from babysitter to national emergency preparedness leader represented not a dramatic transformation, but a natural evolution of qualities that had always been present, gradually developed through experience and education. The Oakwood Heights training program became a model for military community preparedness, demonstrating how civilian emergency leadership training could complement existing military emergency protocols. The success led to requests from military installations worldwide, expanding Sarah's influence to military families stationed in Europe, Asia, and other overseas locations. As Sarah approached her 15th year since Jake's asthma attack, she received an invitation that represented the ultimate recognition of her career trajectory. The President of the United States wanted to present her with the Presidential Citizens Medal, the nation's second highest civilian honor, recognizing her contributions to emergency preparedness and community safety. The White House ceremony took place on a bright spring morning with Sarah's parents, Jake and Emma Hendricks, now college graduates, and representatives from communities across the country where her training programs had been implemented. The citation read, "For exemplary deeds of service and responsibility that have strengthened emergency preparedness capabilities nationwide and saved countless lives through innovative civilian training programs." Standing in the East Room of the White House, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her from a suburban living room to the nation's most prestigious recognition for civilian service. But more than the honor itself, she was moved by the presence of people whose lives had been touched by the programs she had developed, community leaders who had successfully coordinated emergency responses, medical students who had become physicians with deeper appreciation for civilian capabilities, and families who had been better prepared for crises because of training that traced its origins to her teenage experience with Jake Hendricks. During the reception following the ceremony, Sarah was approached by a young woman named Rebecca Martinez, a recent college graduate who had grown up in one of the communities where Sarah's training programs had been implemented. "Dr. Mitchell, I wanted to thank you for showing my generation that ordinary people can prepare themselves to do extraordinary things when others need help," Rebecca said. "Your programs in our community inspired me to become a teacher, and I'm planning to specialize in emergency preparedness education for children. I want to help create the next generation of people who stay calm and make good decisions during crises." The conversation reminded Sarah that the most important legacy of her work wasn't the recognition or the policy achievements, but the people who had been inspired to carry forward the mission of emergency preparedness and community service. Rebecca represented hundreds of young people who had chosen careers in emergency medicine, education, public safety, or community leadership because they had been exposed to Sarah's philosophy that effective crisis response was both learnable and teachable. Later that evening, as Sarah returned to her hotel room with the Presidential Citizens Medal, she called Jake Hendricks, now a resident physician specializing in pediatric emergency medicine. Their conversation had become a tradition whenever Sarah received significant recognition, a way of connecting her current achievements to the moment that had started it all. "Jake, I've always wondered, do you remember anything about that night when you couldn't breathe?" Sarah asked. "I remember being scared, but I also remember feeling like you knew what to do," Jake replied. "Even as a 5-year-old, I could tell that you weren't panicking. That made me feel safer, even though I couldn't breathe properly. I think that's when I first understood that some people know how to help during scary situations. And now you're one of those people helping other children during their scary situations, because you showed me it was possible. Sarah, you didn't just save my life that night. You showed me what I wanted to become." As Sarah prepared for sleep that night, she understood that the Presidential Citizens Medal represented not an endpoint, but a milestone in an ongoing mission. There were still communities to train, still emergency responders to educate, still young people to inspire with the understanding that preparation and service could transform ordinary individuals into extraordinary helpers during times of crisis. Teenage Babysitter, who had once called 911 in a moment of emergency, had become a nationally recognized leader whose influence extended to thousands of communities and millions of people. But at its core, Her mission remained exactly the same as it had been that Tuesday evening in Oakwood Heights, to ensure that when someone needed help, the people around them would be ready, willing, and able to provide it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to expand emergency preparedness training, and new chances to inspire others to develop the confidence and capabilities needed to serve their communities during times of crisis. The salute that had started it all had evolved into a national movement, but its essence remained unchanged. Recognition that courage, preparation, and service were qualities that could be developed by anyone willing to accept the responsibility. That came with being ready to help when help was needed most. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.